The co-founder, co-parent, creative director, and president of Hive, Clark James.
What does real look like? This is a question that we deal with on a daily basis in our company, and it's a kind of an odd question because we have to look at how we take our craft and how we fool the eye and make you believe that what we're showing you is real so that you don't disengage from the story. Because the truth is, when you watch entertainment, a movie or a television series, we want to engage in the story and not be focused on the performances of the CG characters or the green screen composites. So our job is to make that believable and keep you embedded in the story. And if we don't do our job properly, you will disengage and we will have done our job poorly. So what does real look like? At Hive, we're a visual imaging studio, so we work on a variety of projects, and specifically Grimm. I think we've done close to 800 shots now. And I was involved in the pilot episode of Grimm when they developed the original morphing technique. And that was a really exciting process to be involved in because they came to us and said, what could a monster transform look like? And so everybody, of course, looks at everything online that's already been done. And we copied it, or we try not to copy it, but yet everybody expects us to copy what's been done before. So when we do these really cool new looks, they're like, well, it doesn't look like it's been done before. So it's this dichotomy of how do we break out of the mold? So eventually we did. We tested for the job. We were based here in Portland. And we won the contract. And then the studio in LA found out about us. And they didn't believe that Portland company was capable of doing the work, so we had to test again. And so we had to do the test again, another test, and we won the second test, and we actually won the contract. We were able to scale our company up and build from there, and we've been involved in Grimm since then. So we're pretty critical in the process, and we've been able to employ quite a few people, and we love what we do, and we have a big infrastructure now we've built around it. I think we have about 35 artists currently, a lot on Nike, Grimm, and other shows. So our job is to bring somebody's vision to reality, and we become known as a fur house. We do hair really, really well. And I never thought I would be an owner of a hair styling company, but it's worked out really well for us. So we put hair on everything, and we have a full-time stylist who does just digital styling, which I never thought I would. I'm proud of that. I employ a guy. So anyway, our team has this special ability to integrate live action and digital characters very seamlessly, and that's what we do. So for anybody who's into the nerdy side of it, which I run the creative side of the company with my partner, who does more of the administrative HR people side. I try to stay away from that a bit. Those people are lucky too. So I also work in the data side. I also oversee our data management, and if you're interested in what we do data-wise, we run on 16 file servers that are on all the time. We're always in 5 locations, our data is, because if we shut down, we have to deliver sometimes on Thursday for a Friday episode. It's all via FTP. So we are constantly turning data around, and if we have 2 or 3 hours down, we can lose the whole account, and that's obviously something that would ruin our company. So our data is constantly on different servers, and we have a system that's set up that if a data or server crashes, we can jump to another server, rename it, and immediately everybody continues working. We have about 35 to 40 workstations. We have an entire render farm with about 400 processors that just chew on data 24/7 and make a lot of heat, as you can imagine. And right now we have about 250,000 gigabytes on our network, and we increase that by about 50,000 gigabytes every 4 or 5 months. I estimate we do about 2 billion to 4 million mouse clicks a week, and I hope that someday we can seize that energy and turn it into electricity and power a developing country somewhere. So before I go too far, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you some of the work we've done on Grimm the first 4 seasons, and hopefully it speaks for itself. And if you don't believe the shots, you can Twitter Mark.
Kiss me like you did before. Kill him unless you keep us. You're a Grim? Peace.
There you go. Cool. Now, I don't actually work on the shots anymore. I have an amazing team that does, and I'm so impressed with what these people do on a daily basis. Sometimes I come in and go, how did you do that? Because I want to know about it. We've actually been able to employ a lot of people that came just out of school when we started who are now senior artists within our company, and it's been really exciting to actually develop also and be involved in economic development of Portland. So what I want to talk to you about is this term Uncanny Valley. I don't know if you've ever heard this term before. So in CG or animation or visual effects, the closer we come to the simulated reality, the more discerning our eye becomes and the more skeptical we become of that content. And the more we become skeptical, the more we disengage and get out of the story. And so Uncanny Valley, this term means that the closer we get to reality, the deeper the chasm of disbelief grows. And so our goal is to bridge the Uncanny Valley. So I want to show you a couple of quick samples of images. Neytiri from Avatar, we've all seen this movie, I'm assuming. We believe these characters, but I also, if you agree with me, maybe not, there's also a sense of disbelief in there. There's always a sense of unreality in these characters in these CG films that we're not fully able to engage in, and we don't always know why, what it is that makes us not quite believe. And this is what we have to decipher all the time. But then you get a character like Mike from Monsters, Inc., who has one eyeball, so we're not asked to believe that Mike is real. He's just a creature and a character and a comedian. So we fully engage in this story, and we're able to fully get into this film because we're not asked to cross the Uncanny Valley. There are other movies we may have seen, like Polar Express, which I call Zombie Express, Final Fantasy, film that did struggle because you just couldn't engage. And a lot of it for me is always in the eyes, that liquid, that wetness, that sparkle, that human spirit. It's really, really difficult to simulate, and they're getting closer. And I think that'll really help us bridge that Uncanny Valley. So what are visual effects? Basically, visual effects, our goal is to augment a story, not be a featured component, okay? We are there to support the story, and that's what we try to do. A perfect example, George Lucas said, a special effect is a tool, a means of telling a story. A special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing. And now, that's a lot coming from a guy who created Jar Jar Binks, right? I mean, we gotta agree there. But he even said back in the days of Return of the Jedi, when they were out in these giant desert scenes and they're massive sets, it's like, we're not here to focus on the sets are a storytelling component, which is pre-visual effects. And then we're kind of the next generation of that idea. So how we do it, people often ask this. It's a pretty complicated process, as you can imagine. Every one of these shots is touched by about 15 artists, and it goes through a complex pipeline from 3D sculpture to surfacing to lighting to hair to rendering, which is just a digital computers chewing away on this complex data, to compositors who then take it and compile it into the final imagery. So I have what I just call the big four. The things that we really focus on are surface, making a surface look believable. What goes into the qualities of a surface? It's a question you may have never asked yourself, but when you're a 3D artist, you look at it all the time. Lighting, we're all lit. The world kind of doesn't exist without lighting. I have form because of the lighting we experience. It's all around us. So people specialized in lighting observe this all the time. Motion. Motion is so critical that we know how things move, and we see something move just off or different, it throws us off, but we may not be aware of it. So what I want to do today is kind of show you a couple brief samples of how we do what we do, and next time you're out and you see a movie or a TV show that doesn't look quite right, maybe you can identify what it is that isn't quite syncing with you. And the last one is integration. When we create a digital asset or a digital model or one of these creatures, how do we blend it into that shot? What are the components that make it believable? Integration is obviously the critical last component, and it takes a very, very specialized artist to do that craft with a very discerning eye. So, surfacing. Just example, my hand. My hand is made up of a lot of complex components when you create a surface, because in 3D, you don't get anything for free. Everything has to be created. It's perfect by default. So we have to create imperfection, we have to create dirt, we have to create scratches and scars and blood, and you saw the witches up there. There's a lot of work goes into those. So we have one level is bump, is that little micro texture you see on things, the pores, the wrinkles, the little knobs and bumps. The second one is displacement. Displacement is actually when the geometry of a model, and you've probably all seen wireframe 3D models, and you know how they're really smooth. A displacement actually takes those little points and moves them in 3D space and gives you a little bit of a texture. It's kind of like a bump, but with actual 3D positioning. Then we get into color. What is the color? When you take away the reflection and the yellow light that's influencing my skin color, what color is my skin really? Because we're getting a lot of these bounce colors, so when we're doing 3D animation, we have to subtract and work in an environment that's neutral so that we aren't influenced by these colors. Then we get into diffusion. How does the light fall off into our textures and our skin? How does it wrap and penetrate? Subsurface scattering is a really interesting thing, and it's new. Subsurface scattering just came along a few years ago, and this is what you see like in the development of like Pixar films, especially where the quality of the films grew. It's how the light penetrates our skin and bounces underneath our skin. It's what makes, when you look into like a balloon, you get that beautiful kind of glow within. Anytime you have a translucent surface like marble and the light penetrates and wraps around the corner, that's called subsurface scattering. Ambient occlusion is where does light not show? Where is the light occluded? Where am I not seeing the light? Of course, we know what shadows are. And these are, by the way, also in layers, so that everything when we do surfacing happens in layers, so they have to be built from the bottom up. And what sits on top of all surface is reflection. How does my arm reflect the world? How does this chair, because it's a matte surface, have a reflection, but yet this chrome is really shiny? These are all things that we have to figure out. We have to break them down and layer them. And the last one's specularity. And you've probably heard of specular highlights on objects. Specularity is how light bounces off a surface. A matte surface like my arm will take a light and spread it out. And then you put a light on a shiny surface and you get a really hard, crisp edge. So going forward, I'm going to show you some quick samples of what these look like. So this is original plate we'll get from Grimm. Example, we'll paint out the dots, we'll paint out her hair. We'll prepare the shot for the CG element. So the first layer is bump. This is what it looks like when it comes out of the computer. It doesn't look like much, but this is just all those little micro textures I was telling you about. Then we get into displacement. This is all those physical micro deformations in the surface that create texture and dimensionality. This is what really adds a lot of realism to a piece. And when you see old computer technology or animation, this didn't exist yet. So a lot of things tend to look flat and smooth. Color. Color is a very difficult one, like I mentioned, because what does color look like on a surface when it's not being affected by light? And these are all hand-painted textures, by the way, by different artists. Diffusion, again, where does the light sink in deeper? Where does the light sit on the surface? Around the mouth, around the eyes, the light doesn't penetrate as well. It creates dark shadows. Subsurface scattering, it's actually there, but this monitor is a little dark, sorry. So you can't see it. There's actually a glowing character right there. Ambient occlusion, again, where light doesn't go, where light is occluded, where the shadows come. So again, when the computer processes this, these are all layers that are basically printed out I say printed digitally into a layered file that we then have, and we can compile these together and blend them, tweak them, and create a final image. Here's our reflection in the eyes, the teeth, a little bit on the skin, and the specularity. How does the light sit on the surface of a certain character's skin? Is he oily skin? Is he dry skin? Is he cracked and crusty? It's going to be affected dramatically. And when you put them all together, you get something like this. And we have control, again, to manipulate and say, I want more specularity, I want less reflection. And this is where the skill of these artists really come in. So next I want to show you a quick thing about lighting. There's all types of lighting. Lighting comes in colors and shadows and photons, but when it really comes down to it, I want to show you what the world looks like with no light. This is a ball with no light. Form, this is, I think, a really interesting thing. It doesn't matter if you're in animation or not, but when you go out and look at the world, form exists through light. And you can play with things in your home on the table and put an orange out and put the kitchen light on it. And if you're nerdy like most of us, you'll do that stuff. I'm going to show you what it looks like with a single rim light on it. You've probably seen the moon. It looks something like this sometimes. This is just a single rim light, or a fill light, but it doesn't have quite the form yet. So I'm going to add another light. I'm going to add a rim light to it, just a little bit of backlighting, and I'm going to create more form. So that's two lights. And all of a sudden, our black world starts to take shape. And we're working on a show like Grimm, or any project. The lighting has to match what the real environment was when they shot the plate. We will look at how the lights affect the real human, and we will light our digital characters accordingly to match, and that's really important. So it's a very specialized skill again. I'm going to add another little key light, which is our main front spotlight. Again, we're going to add a little more dimension. Then I'm going to get a little soft ambient blue. And now we have form. Now we have, and of course I'm going to add hair because we add hair to everything, right? Because hair just looks cool and everything. All right? So that's kind of the basics of lighting. I try to break it down very simple, but look at it someday. I want to challenge you to look at lighting and just observe it and understand it. The next one is motion. Motion, again, is the same kind of issue we face with lighting or with surfacing. It breaks down into components, and this is where animators come in. Motion capture data, which we've all seen, is very realistic. A lot of movement. It's almost creepy sometimes because it's so real in a digital environment. Animators live and breathe this. I started out as an animator on the M&Ms back at Will Vinton Studios a long time ago, and one of our major conversations was, how much does an M&M weigh, and if it landed on another M&M, would it crack its shell? And there's important conversations like that happening around the globe all the time. How much mass, how much motion? So real quickly, motion, we all see it, but we don't necessarily know what it looks like until it looks wrong. So mass and weight, the translation of an object, how fast it starts and how fast it stops. Overlapping motion. You've ever seen a fish swim or a dog tail? If a dog's tail moves like this, it doesn't feel right. And you look at the old Disney method, this is overlapping motion. It's when you get multiple motions crossing over each other that create these sweeping actions. It's really important to understand in animation. The wind-up. If you're going to throw something, I don't just throw something. I always have to initiate movement with pre-movement. There's a lot of subtleties in that movement that are important. Of course, speed, acceleration, deceleration. When you change directions, mass has to slow down and stop and redirect itself. And of course, friction and other processes. I'm going to show you just real quick a little simulation that I ran. It's a paper airplane. I added friction, mass, weight, surface. It's like 5 little settings and some gravity, and I let it go. And this is what's so neat about digital now, is that it gave me this little quick simulation. So if I was going to animate that by hand, it would probably take half a day or so. This took about maybe 30 seconds to simulate once all the properties were set up. And so animation and visual effects are moving in this direction where not only do we have to hand animate things anymore, but now we can run these processes and set properties, and math literally takes over. I added a little bit of fake camera movement and just a backdrop, which adds to that realism too. And again, it's about trying to fake the eye. So the last topic is integration I talked about before. Lighting, shadows, color. How does the live action and how does our digital element tie together and make them seamless? One of the simple things that you run into all the time, you've all seen green screens? Green screens, it comes down to the last pixel. It always is that last pixel because the difference between the real world and my digital face on top of this, this background is that 1 pixel edge. And so we spend a lot of time in integration trying to blend those two surfaces together because that's where the two worlds collide. And sometimes you'll notice in films that the green screen is not quite right or it's too soft. And that's something to always watch out for. And a big one is grain. Film and video has grain in it. It's got noise and texture. Digital doesn't. So we always have to sample and look at the grain of a real plate and try to match it with the grain of the CG. So there's other things like depth of field, motion blur. They're more cinematography type elements, but this is really where the worlds come together. That being said,
well, let's go for
this is a little breakdown of a shot you watched earlier. That just shows you some of the elements that go into creating a shot. We actually shot the goober stuff with the hose shot on a wall, as you'll see here. So sometimes we sample real live action and integrate it. It's a disgusting shot, isn't it? I don't know why they picked that one for me, but okay. So that is a kind of an overall. And what I want to accomplish is I want you just to look at world. I want you to look at movies and look at TV a little bit differently. And when something doesn't quite meet your eye, maybe you'll understand a little better. And my dad always said, reality checks don't come in the mail. I just like that quote. Speaking of reality. So the next time you watch a movie, again, I hope you have a better understanding. And whatever you do, and no matter how appealing it sounds to you, don't ever invite me to see a movie with you because I will ruin it. Okay? That's it. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a seat. Keep it going for Clark, everybody. We have a couple of mics out in the audience if anyone has any questions. Really fascinating presentation, by the way. I love seeing that shot by shot. I could watch that all day. Anybody have any questions for Clark? Yes, we have a hand up back here.
I have answers.
So besides your own production, what would you say your favorite example of really good VFX or CG is in another production?
I would have to say it would be in a film that I don't notice it's there. I think probably one of the most successful examples where I was fully engaged in the story is Titanic. Titanic used visual effects, animation, miniatures, and I think that movie is pretty much seamless as far as a story because, I don't know if you agree, but I was engaged from start to finish, and that to me was a successful visual effects movie.
Hello.
Hi.
I actually was curious about your own journey in understanding the elements that go into the finished product. Like you were talking about all the different kinds of lighting elements. Was that something that you kind of learned along the way, or was there some particular source that you found helpful?
That's a really, really important, great question because this has been an evolution for me over 16 or 18 years. When I began, I started out as just an animator. I didn't know how to 3D model anything. And this is before Toy Story, so it was pretty early on. We actually had just wireframe characters. We didn't have shading on them, so everything was a lot more challenging. And I learned as I went because I wanted to know more. And I didn't even get into visual effects until I did a short film. And I have friends of mine who own a visual effects company were going to do the shots, and they bailed out on me. So I had to do it myself. So I sat down with After Effects and I learned it. And then as soon as I finished them, a friend of mine said, hey, those are pretty cool. I just got a Showtime series. Do you want to work on some shots? So I was like, sure. So I hired some people and just kind of, and over the course of time, again, going back, it's a great question because I think about the evolution. Like, I remember buying my first camera and playing with lenses. Like, what does a 35 millimeter lens look like versus a 200 millimeter lens? And then understanding there's a story component to that, and then adopting that into my library, and then understanding what lighting meant. And it was literally sitting down in the computer or in the kitchen and turning the lights off and putting a light on something and going, wow, this is what light does, how light creates form and shadow. And so it's this long evolution, and then it came down, and I go back to integration. There are very few people that understand integration well, and it's kind of, you have to have an overall understanding of all these pieces to really know how to say, it's not looking right. Think about this, you're sitting in front of a computer for 36 hours a day, these guys are, and they don't have any family or friends, except for each other. We just feed them through IVs. And they sit there and they look at this image all day long. And after the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, does it look right? Does it look real? And you can't even tell anymore. So a lot of times you have to get up and leave the room or ask another person. So that last step is really being able to say, is it camera? Is it motion? Is it texture? Is it lighting? What is not working right? And that's where all those skills over the years come together and create, I think, what allows us to do. We have a company motto. It was my motto, actually. It's everyone's motto now, or else they don't work there anymore. We do the 2%. That anybody can really work hard and get 98%. And what makes us special, or what has made us succeed, I believe, is we will for that extra 2%. And not because our client asked for it, but because it's our own pride to take it to that level. And everybody's adopted that, and we've been very successful because of that, I think.
Down in front.
How's the advent of 4K and 8K and ultra high def going to impact you? You talked about that valley.
This is a good one. I want everyone to hear this.
Sorry about that. So how's the advent of 4K and 8K and ultra high def, and we're going to get into 3D, and everything's going to seem so real, and yet you talked at the very beginning about that valley where you start doubting whether it distracts you from the story.
Yeah.
Is this going to make your job easier, harder? Is it going to open up more opportunities? What do you think?
Absolutely miserable. I remember when we were doing M&Ms, we were working at television resolution, 720 by 405 or 540, which is about this big. This is real world space for old visual, right? And then we got into HD, like 720p. Now we're at 1080p, which is, then we get into 4K, which is 4 times that resolution. You get to 8K, which is 4 times that. For us, it's a data transfer nightmare, because you look at you all know what HD is, 1920, 1080 pixels, if you're into pixels like we are. When you go to 4K, you don't double that image to 4,000 pixels. It takes 4 of those images to make up a 4K image from HD. That's 4 times the amount of data. It's 4 times the pipeline. It's 4 times the render power. It's 4 times the screen resolution. It's a really nightmarish process. So we actually chose a while back, we will never do a 3D project, and we will never do a 4K project, because it just crushes our system. And I think the most important part for me is I love story. All this is that unimportant to me, believe it or not. It's about story, because you can watch a really great film, very low resolution on a small screen, and you'll be captivated and buy into it. And that still needs to stay the important part. And there's a lot of times when I'll be on a movie, like a visual effects supervisor will have me come on and work with the director to design shots. And he'll say, I want to do a visual effects shot here. And I'm like, I think you can get it in camera. And I'll give him ideas, and I'll talk him out of visual effects shots. It cuts into our budget, of course, but it helps them tell the story in camera and tries to keep it real and authentic. So I think that's the most important part, is focus on story.
So I teach kind of a 101 digital media class when we cover the Uncanny Valley, and the question I had for you is, it kind of gets away from your story idea, but physically sort of who's done it the best, who's come the closest at crossing Who's come the closest to cross it?
Who do you think's come the closest to crossing it?
Probably the Kardashians.
I think they're pretty fake looking to me. I mean, they look like simulations. You know, I look at like a film like Star Wars has some really beautiful integration, but the motion's wrong. Have you ever watched a character move really fast and they just move too quick? I think that Peter Jackson's done beautiful work, but there's a quote that John Lasseter from Pixar said a long time ago: a camera should never move where a camera can't move, right? So when we move a camera around, we know what a camera looks like. When you have a camera flying through sets and all through these landscapes, we can do it with the drone now, so I guess it's getting closer. But that kind of sucks away reality, so it kind of killed that for me. I would say Avatar, on a global scale of a film, probably has come the closest that I've seen to creating a full consistency across a movie. Anybody have any other big films they can think of that are maybe better? No one's seen a movie, I guess. What's that? District 9? District 9 is phenomenal. What's the new one that just came out with the same director? Chappie. That's a great, thank you. Chappie was like unbelievable. Like I didn't see a flaw in that movie. I thought he was real.
Okay, if we don't have one more back here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see you guys.
One more question? Yeah, so you hear about directors, as a layperson who doesn't do any of this, that want to limit CG because they feel like, if you can build big sets or whatever, it's more realistic. And I wondered how you feel about that. I mean, I would have thought that the green goo that was spit on that guy's face was actual green goo, but it turns out it's CGI. Do you feel like they're getting closer and closer to where pretty soon it'll be just as real to use CG, or you feel like there'll always be a space for a really big boat instead of a big CG boat, for example?
Well, that goo was real goo, right? We shot that, somebody actually spit that out of a tube onto a wall. So that was integrated. We could simulate that, but it would take us a lot longer. I think that I'm a commercial director by trade. I never intended to get into visual effects. It just happened through our company. And it's been fortuitous. So when I'm directing a commercial, I'm always trying to steer away from visual effects. I'm trying to do it real on the camera. So I come from both sides of it. And I think that it comes back to the story, what best supports the story. If you hear the term fix it in post, that's the biggest
You can say shit.
That's the biggest bullshit line on set. Because I always tell, when I'm on set, I'm like, I'm the only guy who can say fix it in post because I'm the guy who's gonna have to fix it in post while you guys are home sleeping. Because people will say, oh, we'll just fix it in post, let's move on, right? They end up sticking the post-production house with it. And that actually ends up costing a lot more money a lot of times. It's best just to get it in camera if you can. And I want to discourage the discussion of should we do it CG or should we do it visual effects or should we do it real? It should just, the story and the budget should dictate what happens, I think, and we'll have the best results.
What did you think of the latest George Miller production, the Mad Max Fury Road, which a lot of people said, oh, it's all practical effects. It's not. It just looks like it is.
Mad Max, yeah. I actually haven't seen it, but I heard it's rad. Yeah, it's practical, right?
A lot of it is.
Oh yeah, see that's...
If you do behind the scenes, the shot by shot kind of effects reel, it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of not practical effect on that, but yeah. It's a really good integration.
I don't watch a movie with me like that because I just picking them out all the time. That's the curiosity thing.
I have a question, I guess, in continuing with the theme of the day and sort of related to this gentleman's question, because you kind of said the budget should dictate the choices that are made. And Rick Baker lately has been giving a lot of interviews about his studio. You all knew Rick Baker is a famous makeup artist, perhaps like the most
He goes back to Star Wars days.
Movie makeup artist.
Yeah.
Just shuttered his studio and has been blaming CGI for the end of his era, I suppose. So I guess this has sort of been a theme of the day, digital versus physical. Is there any hope for you and Rick Baker to coexist in a long-term way, or is that?
I don't know, I've never met him, so I have to see how we get along. That's a good question, because that's how I started. I started as a sculptor, wanting to build practical makeup. And we've had this issue. By the way, my business partner Gretchen's here. She deserves as much credit for anything that's our success. I see that. Thank you for Gretchen Miller. She's right here. You can raise your hand, it's okay. I think that it's not about a competition. Even on Grimm, they'd shoot a lot of practical makeup effects, and we'll skip the shots, and they look terrible sometimes. Nothing against their, award-winning makeup artists. They just don't look real. So we'll actually replace the shots to make them integrate with the rest of the stuff better. I think that the practical makeup artists have to up their game, because again, this is Uncanny Valley. And we've all seen films like E.T. and when the head comes up and it bobbles and you can see the joints, and we all know there's a guy in there going like this, right? But then you get characters like R2-D2 and C-3PO that I hope will always stay practical because they require that natural movement. So again, I think the story dictates what's best use. And if the practical guys can't do it to the level that it's believable, because our level is so high now. I mean, you look at this, by the way, Grimm. Those shots look amazing. And I only say that because I'm real proud of our artists. This is feature film quality work done in 3 weeks per shot. We'll do up to 40 shots in 3 weeks while we're working multiple episodes. And 3 years ago, this would be feature film quality work. And we're expecting that on a TV level now. So if they can't keep up, then I don't feel guilty.
Maybe a lot of these budgets can't afford Rick Baker's pay grade.
Yeah, I think that's part of the deal too.
Yeah. One more question and then we can get out of here.
You were talking about story in relation to just what do you prefer. My question is, with character development, would you say that would help more with bridging the Uncanny Valley than maybe lighting?
Can I mention the Zemeckis story real quick? So when I met Gretchen a long time ago, she was working for Robert Zemeckis, and he was developing a Polar Express. And we saw a very early demo of Polar Express, and it came back, this is really early, and it was really amazing, but the characters didn't have any life in their eyes. And I remember saying to her, if they don't fix those eyes, this movie's never going to be completely, you can't buy into this story. And going back to the character development, it doesn't matter how many characters or how many varieties or what style, if they don't address the core issues of what make us believe, just the subtleties of that, for me, killed that movie. And I tried watching it, and I couldn't get through it. It was painful for me. That's why I call it Zombie Express. No rip on him. But anyway, I'm hoping that that maybe the next generation, or what's happening now in VR, and we saw today in visual effects and animation, is that we start to focus on the subtleties, like they're talking about VR, like having a nose that we see out of our eyeballs makes us believe the world is real. If we can find those little elements beyond what I described today that make us believe, like when you look at something and go, what makes it look real? If we can hone in on those little subtleties, and I would start with the eyes, I think that we will start to bridge that valley, and we'll get there.
Okay, so I have to know, and then we can leave on something fun. Can you tell us about Chihuahuas?
Are you saying that wasn't fun?
This has all been fun.
Was that
but this
boring
I have to hear about.
Chihuahuas.
Yes, Chihuahuas.
So, we used to have a Chihuahua who was vicious, like most of them can be. And years ago, I came up with a film idea called Chihuahuas, half piranha, half Chihuahua. And we have put this on the back burner for years and slowly developed it. And now that we have a successful visual effects company and have the tools and the resources, we put it into development and recently brought on a film agent. And Gretchen and I are developing it into a full feature. And hopefully we will be in production on it in the next year, and it will be real, and it will be bigger than Star Wars.
Well,
right?
and And hopefully better than Sharknado.
It will be better than Sharknado. My presentation was better than Sharknado as far as integration and reality.
Thank you so much, Clark.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, great. That was great.